Well, friends, welcome to the season of Lent. It began on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, and continues, of course, then to Easter. And today we'll be dealing with an issue which perplexes all of us. It's not only for one moment in our lives or one day or in only one situation. We're going to deal with an issue that we deal with every single day of our lives. And sometimes in the Congregational church and tradition, this word is often skirted around for some reason, but it's the word sin. Maybe I sinned by offering 30 minutes of meditation time earlier. I repent. So we're going to speak about sin. And yet to do so, it's somewhat of a slippery project. What is sin? And are we all sinners? Or do we sin? Can we clump certain actions into the category of sinning? Can we clump certain persons in categories called sinners? I know in some lines of theology, some pastors and other believers have a great time discussing exactly what makes you become a sinner. And they love to call others sinners. And they call themselves sinners, which is good, because they declare us all to be born into sin, which is, I think, a little too harsh myself. Honestly, I'm not afraid to say that. They lay blame, as it tells us in the Bible, directly on Adam and Eve. That's where it all began, you know. Supposedly with the serpent and the fruit on the tree of knowledge. That's where it supposedly all became. And really subversively in the Bible, they tried to blame it just on Eve, the woman. She's to blame. Not so fast, friends. I believe there is such a thing as sin, but I don't think it is what we humans have made of it. I can't see that our God made sin to be the outrageously attractive thing which we have made it to be. It's thought to be so outrageously attractive that we have trivialized it, I believe. Why, in fact, it was trivialized from the beginning when Adam and Eve, who had the perfect life, went without nothing. They had everything they wanted. They knew no need and they felt no pain of separation from God, and still they were so attracted to something they were not supposed to have. If God really wanted us to stay right where we are, in the state that we are supposedly in Eden, then why did God allow us to be created in a way which would directly oppose God's wishes? Well, that's, of course, the question of eternity, okay? And that's one of the questions that this retelling of that tale is trying to do. It's trying to get us to talk about it, because each of us is going to have a different slant on it. So, you see, I think sin is not something that's so outrageously attractive, but I think that sin is something which is much, much more cunning. I think sin is cunning. I believe sin is something which doesn't cut us off from the love or protection of God, but it cuts us off from the love and protection of our own self-respect. That's where I think the real thing happens. Now that seems to be the something that's truly attractive, lowering the respect we have for ourselves. I truly believe that all humans would rather have a wonderful relationship with the super entity, the all-powerful God. I can't see that anyone would find such a relationship so unattractive enough as to declare that God does not exist. However, it happens, and that's just my opinion. You can have yours. I'm pretty fine with that. No big deal with that. Now, you have heard the group of Scientologists, have you not? Dianetics. Now, this group, believe me, has some very shady things going on, from what I can tell. However, in their early learning, I think that group has some really good things that they say they do for their followers. L. Ron Hubbard was a leading science fiction writer. He was the founder of that group. And they believe that there is no God greater than themselves. They believe that we create and control our own destinies, but beyond attempting to explain who they are and what they do to follow their own idea of faith, I do believe that they fall into a group of people who have rejected the antiquated explanations that ancient interpreters of the Bible have told us about sin. That's a big sentence, I know. I think they believe in respecting themselves. They believe in respecting their bodies. I believe they believe in respecting their creative spirits. Now, in that understanding, I believe they truly are believers. They simply have found a way that is more palatable to what they would call their modern mind. Now, don't go off telling people that I told you that Scientology was the way to go. Hello? I'm not telling you that, but I do see a certain attraction in what they're doing. They are respecting themselves, and therefore, in their initial teachings at least, they are really caring for others and themselves, okay? Now, what I am saying is that I have a sense of my own ability and every other human's ability to allow themselves to believe more in themselves and in the powers of God. However, long ago, I gave up control of my life, personally. I gave up control. I left the managing of my life not in my hands, but in God's. And I truly believe all of us would be better off if we relieved our tired, knotted hands of the steering wheel in our lives and allowed the Almighty instead to steer us. We'd certainly be able to enjoy the ride a great deal more if we're not constantly watching the road. But to return to sin and self-respect, I believe that the lack of self-respect is what sin really is. And you can disagree with me all you want. People often do anyhow. So no big deal there also. But I believe that the moment we lose respect for our mind, for our body, for our relationships, or our well-being, we have reached for the fruit of that tree of knowledge which God so long ago declared off limits. It's just another way of seeing the world. This was a creative story that was told about this way of self-respect and the loss thereof. I think that fruit was declared off limits because eating of that fruit was too great a responsibility for us. To hold in our hearts, our minds, or literally in our guts, the essence of control is often sometimes too weighty for us. And when we believe we control everything about our lives, we begin to believe that we also control everything else, especially others. Because eventually, in the end, we falter. When we think we're in control of everything, when we believe that we can control other people's lives, we falter. We do. We believe in our own godhood when that happens. We do things we would never have dreamt of doing had we not felt so powerful and so able to control everything. And we end up hurting our minds, our bodies, our relationships. We end up hurting others' minds, others' bodies, others' relationships. So self-respect is something that keeps us from exposing ourselves to embarrassing moments. But if we believe ourselves to be in control, we have, in essence, read our own news clippings and believed them. We can become so enamored with ourselves that we think that we know better than God. Now, Jesus, in the story today, has brought several chances to prove that he is in control, and not even he wants to claim control. The tempter, as it says in the Bible, asks him to change stones into bread. I want to thank Tom for changing stones into bread today, right on our communion table here. The tempter asks him to count on angels to save him from a fall from a tall building. And the angel asks him to accept dominion, control over all the lands that he can see. He asks all these things. If only he were to accept control and to control God's options. How do we see it playing out in our life, that kind of thing? Where are we tempted to do things you would never have done unless you believed that you were in control? Have you acknowledged sin as a true force in your life? Have you realized where you have lost your self-respect in order to get something, or in order to take something, or in order to demand something, whether it be for yourself or your enjoyment or your control? There is a temptation to see sin and loss of self-respect every day in others, but do I take the time realizing it in myself? This is something we can find out oftentimes in times of meditation. Because when we silence ourselves, we can have the opportunity to see the world as it truly is, instead of the usual banter that goes on in our heads, telling ourselves, yes, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong. Taking the time to point it out in others is just another step towards exposing my own lack of self-respect, my own sin. So our lesson is to look at ourselves first. I have to open my eyes to the loss of self-respect that is prevalent in my own life, because Jesus told us to not, he said, don't point at the speck in someone else's eye when there's a log in our own. We have to be careful about how we see the world and how we judge the world, and whether or not it is our job to judge the world. This is a very difficult issue. It's an issue that we deal with, especially in times like this, an election year. We get all frothed up. I get all frothed up. And we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we're turning to whatever it is that we trust is more powerful than us. Some of us will say God. Others will say they're church members. Others will say, I don't know. They put their power in something else. But I pray that each and every one of us, especially when we come back to this table here, which is a table of love, and it's a table of acceptance, it's a table of us realizing that we're not in control, and that we can peacefully turn control of our lives back to God, because God knows us and will love us and care for us no matter what. It's sometimes a scary thought, I know. But it is really the only way that's the safe way, the loving way, in inviting the Holy Spirit into our place of being and into our way of life. So my friends, as Jesus was tempted, know that we are tempted as well, and know that God is always with us, and that we can let go of that need to control despite the scariness of it all. And we can know that God will carry us forward, even through the darkest of times. And in that, I hope you find a great deal of solace. My friends, if you are able, would you stand?